So hello everybody, good afternoon, good evening, and even good morning from the whatever corner of the world you are at this moment. Today, Elmarco Talks, I would say it's a grand opening of our second series already, because the previous series was so successful that you encourage us to continue with our effort and basically to organize a second series of these talks. Today, Ivan Ponomarev, as a chief of R&D, Elmarco will be moderating this show.
Katarzyna Rubachkova, our specialist from customer and sales department.
Thank you. So let's jump to another slide where we want to kind of cover what you can expect from us to be happening in the following period. So this is a list of talks that's going to be organized in next month. The program is till January, but we hope that we can continue maybe till April or May next year. Today's topic will be healing the gap in wound technology. And this topic is part of the industrial trends group of topics, because this year is a little bit different from a previous one that we have added maybe another group of talks which called industrial trends. We want to talk about some commercial products or the products which are close to commercialization in this group. Today, Chris Mortimer is going to present. I will talk about Chris a little bit later today, but what I want to mention is that this picture, what you see, is not a fake. Chris is smiling like that all the time, because I know him for a couple of years already, since they actually purchased our technology back in 2020, which was actually a difficult year because of the COVID. But he managed to overcome this kind of tough period, and with his great smile, he's continuing and actually filling the gap in the wound technology. So about Elmarco, before I want to say, of course, a couple of words about Elmarco, because we are organizer. So we are here for more than 20 years already in the market, and we are selling and using the technology called Nanospider. Nanospider is a brand name of technology which is using the electrode as a wire. So it's a needle-free technology, need to say. And what you see, short video, is demonstrating how the technology look like in reality, that we are bringing the solution on the wire, where wire is coated with the solution, and by applying high voltage, the fibers are generated and are coming on the moving substrate, where the end product is basically a roll of the nanofibers coated on the given substrate. We are selling machines. For those who doesn't know, we starting, or our portfolio is covering the small-scale lab machines, which are here for initial research or fundamental studies of, first of all, electrospinning or different polymers, or research in different polymers. And then going through larger machines, half meter, 1 meter, we ending up, or our task or goal is to, of course, sell the industrial scale technology 1.6 meter wide lines. What are the nanofiber application? I think it's very obvious, and there are a lot of already commercial products which are covering nanofibers. I must say that still the first place in the market segment is covered by air filtration. Liquid filtration is definitely coming up recently. Of course, energy, it's a big spoken topic, especially related to the energy savings lately. And today we are covering the group, the big group, which is, of course, a big hope also for Elmarco. It's the medicine. And we will touch the wound care already mentioned topic. So now a little bit more about Chris before I give the word to him. So Chris has a 9-year experience in nanotechnology, and he graduated from Swansea University in Wales. And he's nowadays the CEO of a company called Hybrisan, where Hybrisan is a medtech product development company who develops solutions for chronic wound care. As I said, I know Chris for a couple of years, and I hope you will be enjoying his presentation as much as we will. And please, Chris, start.
Just a quick note before Chris will start his presentation. I just want to remember to the audience that there is a Q&A section during our webinar, so you can put your questions, just chat, write, and we will ask Chris after his talk. Now, Chris, please, it's your time.
Many thanks. And thanks, Katerina. It's a nice introduction. I don't hear that very often, but so yeah, thanks a lot for the opportunity. It's great to be here to discuss Hybrisans, electrospinning, wound care. It's a topic we're very passionate about. And today my talk's going to focus generally on the wound care market. I'm going to talk about electrospinning, of course, but first of all, I'd like to set the scene because I think wound care in particular in the healthcare industry is quite misunderstood. I think the real challenges faced within wound care, I mean, they're exciting. It's an unsolved problem in wound care that we're combating biofilm. So that's what I'm going to focus on today, particularly chronic wounds. So I'm going to discuss the burden that chronic wounds will have on healthcare systems and some of the challenges to be overcome. I'm going to discuss how we here at Hybrisans are solving some of those issues. And also, as I said, how the introduction of Electrospun materials can help to overcome some of the problems. So quickly to start, I've popped a little quote on there from Chris Flynn, who's one of our board advisors. And I think this really sets the scene of the global health crisis, which is becoming. And I think this is of course due to chronic wounds. And as it says in the quote, it's on the verge of becoming a global health emergency. The pennies dropping for clinicians, payers and industries, that currently solutions are suboptimal. And I think what I'm trying to show you here is that actually, whilst it's a big issue, it's a very unsolved issue. And a lot of that is focused around management of the biofilm. So, I mean, just briefly who we are, we're a medtech product development company. I'll touch on that more on the next slide. But the problem that we're solving as a company, and a lot of healthcare companies are solving worldwide, is that over 90% of chronic wounds contain bacteria and fungi living in a biofilm. Again, I will explain what a biofilm is in a second. But basically what we're trying to solve this problem. We've developed a patent pending technology, which we call WoundSan. WoundSan is capable of disrupting biofilm, whilst also remaining low in cytotoxicity, which is one of the big challenges in the medical device sector, particularly due to the regulatory landscape. So just to move on and give you a little bit more about Hybrisans. As I said, we're a medtech product development company. We were founded to investigate and tackle the issues of bioburden and biofilm. We've looked at many sectors historically, but we're very focused on the medical device sector, and in particular wound care. And we develop solutions for infection control, chronic infection being the key focus. And using our expertise in the strong team that we've drawn from local scientific talent, we developed a unique patent pending antimicrobial platform technology, which is purely designed to disrupt biofilm, which is quite unique. It's independently proven, it's low in cytotoxicity, high in efficacy, has a broad spectrum, and it really does disrupt and prevent biofilms very well. We have a fresh, enthusiastic approach to breaking the status quo, invigorating stagnant technology to make an impact on our global communities. So as a business, we've got very strong values. These are based upon our vision of a world without chronic infection. We have a purpose to improve the quality of lives impacted by chronic infection through innovation. And we'll achieve this through our mission to continually break down the barriers of science to provide superior technology, solutions for infection control, preferred by healthcare professionals, ethical and affordable for all. Now, I think in the medical device sector, I think that last little bit is critical. I think there's a lot of developments and innovation that's happened in the space that, unfortunately, due to a lack of affordability, a lack of usability, a lack of ease of use in particular, there's a lot of technologies and devices that have showed significant benefit to patients, but haven't actually seen the market due to the complexity. And that's one of the key topics of this conversation, is that ultimately, to be successful in this sector, not only do you need great technology, unfortunately, it needs to be very affordable, even though you can make cost savings in other areas. But I think most importantly, it needs to be very usable. It needs to be a product that's simple to use, safe to use, that can be used by not only the clinician, but also by the patient, that shows true benefit to the patient. And not only the healthcare provider, but also the patient can see that benefit. And they'll see that benefit, as I said there, through the quality of life, which is being improved due to less frequent dressing changes or a faster healing wound. And I think that's the most important part. And hopefully that's the biggest take home of this talk today. So of course, for an organization like ourselves, there's got to be a commercial opportunity. So I'd like to talk a little bit here about the market size. Globally, the advanced wound care market's roughly 8 billion per annum, about 4.8% compound annual growth rate. And you can see there on the left-hand side that it's very USA dominant, with Europe and the rest of the world making up less than 50%. Now, when you talk about the antimicrobial sector, which this is within wound care, you're talking about $880 million, growing at a very similar rate, but you can see that the European have got a much bigger share. And this is because, I mean, in the EU and the rest of the world and the US to an extent, antimicrobials are very commonplace. And you can see that in the figures. So in overview, basically, this is a significant market. There's a really strong growth rate. And with the right technology, a strong commercial opportunity exists. So I'm going to summarize that commercial opportunity here in one slide. Biofilms are present in 90% of wounds. So obviously we know that biofilm is a big issue in chronic wounds. We know that biofilm is a big issue. Unfortunately, current solutions are ineffective, and infections are caused and exacerbated by the presence of this biofilm. General wounds, which includes both acute and chronic, around 40% of those are infected. And that creates other adverse events and costs. It could lead to things like sepsis. It also means prescription of antibiotics. And ultimately, wounds that aren't chronic becoming chronic. So globally, I'm going to talk a lot about the UK figures in a second, because that's the basis for our business model. But it's worth knowing that this is a global problem. There's 120 million wounds globally, and this is increasing exponentially. Health systems are struggling to cope. It is a serious issue, and you're really seeing that now on the ground. I mean, the figures I'll show in a second really show that in the UK, but you can speak to any clinician in pretty much any country, and they're having troubles dealing with the prevalence of chronic wounds. So as I've said, the antimicrobials market is significant. And what we've done is we've developed WoundSan, which is a platform technology. As I've said, it's unique, it's commercially attractive, it outperforms existing technology, and it remains safe. And I think one of the key important messages for us as Hybrisans, and also for other companies trying to enter this space, I think infrastructure is very important. So in Hybrisans, one of the key things that we've developed is a very strong team. We've got a strong team of internal employees. We've got a strong board of executive and non-executive directors. We also have a strong network of advisors, and they're both from the wound care sector and from the scientific sector, to make sure that we always have the right information and knowledge to ensure that we can reach our goals within business. Now, I talk a lot about commercial opportunity, but ultimately, as I showed in the previous slides, the most important thing for us as a business is to really make an impact on the quality of lives of those affected by chronic wounds. I think that's one of the most critical things. And I think that's why, as an industry in wound care, we need to work together to achieve this goal. So just touching on the burden of chronic wounds, again, as I said, these are all UK figures, but the same is seen globally. The reason these are UK figures, there's a study that's done every 5 years by someone called Julian Guest and others. And this is the data for the most recent study, which ended in 2018. It's also worth noting, of course, as you can see from those dates, that the next period will be ending in 22 and 23. So we'll expect data out from that very soon. But from the last study, you can see there's a 73% increase in the 5-year period for the number of wounds being managed within the UK health system. That's a significant increase. And I think the figures then to the right-hand side are showing that there's only a 53% increase in spend. And I think that speaks volumes for the backlog of patients that exist within the NHS. And that unfortunately, there's there's a term within wound care that's called wound management. And I think one of the key goals for us as a business is to move away from wound management and talk about wound treatment and talk about actually curing root wounds. I think that chronic wounds aren't there to be managed. I think chronic wounds are there to be overcome. And I think that's one of the problems that we're trying to solve. And hopefully others within the industry will come together and solve those problems with us. Because at the moment, you can see that these are increasing at an alarming rate, driven by a perfect storm, mind, of contributing demographic, lifestyle and medicinal factors. And the NHS is struggling, and health systems across the world are struggling to cope. So as I said, this is a global problem. And I think one of the key issues is demographic. I think in this slide, I'm summarizing again UK figures, but we do know that these are representative also worldwide. So first of all, aging population. So in the next 25 years, the number of people older than 85 in England is going to double. And I think that's quite staggering. I mean, obviously, elderly are one of the key demographic areas that will get a chronic wound. And it just goes to show that everything that we're doing within our healthcare system is working. But that results in an aging demographic. Obesity. Now, this one is surprising that in the next 25 years, by 2040, which is 27 years, it's staggering that 7 in 10 adults are forecast to be overweight or obese, which unfortunately, that's just a sign of the current times. And I think an economic crisis is only going to worsen that. We already know that UK diabetes diagnoses have doubled in the last 15 years. And again, as we know, diabetes are a significant contributing factor. A diabetic foot ulcer is the most common of chronic wounds. And inactivity. Unfortunately, around 1 in 3 men and 1 in 2 women in the UK are not active enough for good health. And again, I think that's only been worsened by the COVID pandemic. And a lot of people working from home, not getting out as much. And again, these are all factors. And we know that these are all factors that contribute to chronic wounds. So as I said, I mean, over 90% of chronic wounds have a biofilm. And obviously that's an infection. So this is here showing you the impact of infection on healing. And you can see on the left-hand side that the healing rates are decreasing significantly when you've got a definite or suspected infection. This obviously illustrates the impact of infection on healing, which I think is quite obvious. On the right-hand side, you've got the increased cost. Again, this is quite obvious given the fact that wounds aren't healing as quickly. They're going to cost a lot more. And within the NHS, unhealed wounds cost around 2.5 times more than healed wounds. So what's the issue with wound infection? Okay, we can see it reduces healing rates. We can see it increases costs. It increases clinician time, which obviously significantly decreases the amount of availability for new chronic wounds to be treated. It reduces patient quality of life. And that could be from anything from a wound that smells, from having to go to wound clinic very regularly. And unfortunately, it can lead to amputations and fatality, which is the worst case. And that could be due to sepsis or various other reasons. And these are the problems that have got to be overcome. And by improving the ability of clinicians to tackle wound infection, the burden of chronic wounds can be better managed all over the world. And I think that is why we're on our journey. And that's why we want people to come and join our journey and others to get involved on that journey, because this is such an important space. So the problem, as I've discussed, the problem is there's biofilm in 90% of chronic wounds. The biofilm within the wound is distinct, different characteristics, and it causes some serious issues. So I'll discuss what a biofilm is briefly. A biofilm is basically when you get bacteria or yeast or fungi. It could be a variety of different microorganisms, but they'll grow in a variety of surfaces. Now, it is worth noting that this isn't just unique to surfaces. Biofilm will also form in a planktonic environment, if you like, in a liquid state. But basically, it's when planktonic and free-floating cells, they all adhere to a surface or adhere to themselves, and they put down roots. Now, these roots, as you can see in this diagram, are referred to as EPS, which is extracellular polymeric substance. Now, EPS allows these bacteria to stick together, and effectively, it'll protect them, and they'll protect themselves from any outcompeting agents, now be it antimicrobials or the natural immune system of the body. So once adhered, the biofilm will grow in size as a result of multiplication of cells as they tend to grow, and they can also communicate. Now, I mean, it's mad to think bacteria talk to each other, but they do. There's something called quorum sensing. And this is used by the bacteria and the microorganisms to communicate and basically tell the other cells to go into defense mode. And that just causes further biofilm formation further downstream or further around the wound. And this is so critical to overcoming what the issue is, and that's the biofilm. So to overcome that, you really need to be able to target that EPS, disrupt the structure that's holding these bacteria together. Because as I'll discuss in some coming slides, killing bacteria isn't the difficulty here. It's disrupting the biofilm. It's allowing those bacteria to be in a state where they can be effectively killed using antimicrobial agents or antibiotics. So why is biofilm an issue in wound care? Well, basically, it's been shown, as I've said multiple times, to be present in over 90% of chronic wounds. But quite often, it's not actually the cause. It's more often that the wound's caused by something else, be it demographic, so it could be diet, diabetes, a number of different factors. And basically, you get a perfect environment then for biofilm to form. So on that environment, as you see, over 90% of chronic wounds will have a biofilm, and they're generally resistant to traditional antimicrobial agents, which I'll discuss in a second. So the key message here is that identification of biofilm in chronic wounds is critical, but not only that, the selection of strong antimicrobial and antibiofilm agents is crucial to healing these wounds by disrupting the biofilm. So the antimicrobial market, you can see a lot of companies that you may recognize on there: Convatec, Smith & Nephew, Molenlicker, 3M, Essity, multiple others. These guys dominate the wound care space. Silver products account for over 85% of the global antimicrobial market. However, silver revenues are generally quite flat, and all of the growth within the sector is coming from new technologies such as PHMB and honey. It's worth noting that all major wound care companies have a silver product in their portfolio. I'm going to discuss the flaws of silver in a second, but also some of the other technologies, and explain to you exactly how I think and how we think that you need to solve these issues to overcome the issues within wound care. So I think one of the key questions is asked for new companies and existing companies coming into the wound care space and the medical device space in general is, what are the barriers? So I've already touched on some of these. I mean, there's a very high regulatory environment. There's been the recent introduction of the EU MDR, which is making it a lot more difficult to get products through. With you've got to really prove not only safety but a strong efficacy, and you've got to do that in a much more real-world environment than you used to. Obviously, the FDA governs the US, but generally those two are the two medical device regulations that govern the world, with some different iterations of those in some countries, such as the Middle East, where they'll use those rules with their own rules over and above. But I think the main thing to be overcome is the adoptability. Products really need to be simple to use. They need to improve efficiencies and they need to improve outcome. They've got to be quick. I mean, unfortunately, the people that are treating these wounds haven't got time, so they need to fit into their existing timeframes. And they've got to be very simple to use so that instructions are easy to use. The healthcare professional doesn't need significant training. It can be used by the patient if applicable. And it is worth noting, there's a number of products that look very good on paper, that have a very strong outcome, but they fail to enter the market successfully due to the complexity of their application. I'm not going to go into much detail, but I will say that there's at least one application of Electrospinning I know that's fallen foul to this. And I think it's important that as we develop new products, that we start off with that design process. And that design process, one of the first things you need to consider is, right, what is the problem? How are we going to solve it? And how is this product going to be used? So as I said, usability. Cost. Unfortunately, cost continues to be a significant factor. The healthcare systems across the world will not buy expensive products until they're proven. But obviously, to prove them, the company's got to sell them. So even if you can reduce time significantly, you can rapidly improve healing rates, the cost of that product still needs to be quite comparable. And that's particularly true of the NHS. And I know it's true of other healthcare systems across the world. But I think the most important message here is that for new companies like ourselves and many other companies that are product development companies developing new technologies, it's very difficult to enter the market without commercial support. And that commercial support just absolutely has to come from the big players, be it Convatec, Coloplast, Smith & Nephew, 3M, Essity, Molenlicker, just to name a few. Without the support of these companies that have got access to market, that have got access to clinic, it's very difficult for companies to be successful. And I think that's one of the approaches we've taken. We're not trying to tackle this market independently. We've teamed up with a number of big companies, and we will continue to do so to ensure that our products see the market and help to improve the outcome of patients managing chronic wounds. So what's the gap in wound care? And this is the gap that I'm talking about trying to heal here. It's stagnant. There's been limited introduction of new technologies in recent years. There's been gel in fibres, which I believe the key first patent has just expired for that. And foam technologies have sort of been popular, they've been unpopular, they're becoming popular again. But there's very limited. I think any sort of innovation comes from a small sort of step change to existing. There's nothing particularly disruptive, nothing particularly groundbreaking. I mean, antimicrobials have been dominated by silver for years, and they still continue to dominate, despite the fact that silver shows very limited efficacy against biofilm. And there's some serious questions over toxicity. I mean, there's some good examples of companies, particularly the big players, where they've taken silver and they've modified it by adding certain things, certain surfactants to help to disrupt that biofilm. But the fundamental silver behind it, we know, is not particularly great against biofilm. So as a result, healthcare providers, tissue viability nurses and clinicians, they frequently change dressings. And they do this because they want to have a look at the wound, they want to monitor how it's healing, they want to check if what they're doing at the moment is the right strategy. But it often causes issues. It causes a risk of reinfection. And ultimately, these infections and these biofilms sit around for months. And a chronic wound, whilst it started off being 4 to 6 weeks, it could be 4 to 6 months, it could even be years. And as I said previously, it could lead to amputations and unfortunately fatalities. So the wound care market is calling out for new innovation, both in terms of biofilm management, which is the key set focus of our business at the moment, but also smarter wound dressings. And I will discuss in a second how nanofibres can benefit the space there. And I think it can tick both of those boxes. But I think with that innovation, we can really empower healthcare professionals and then move into this market space and hopefully remove the stagnation from the market, reduce the backlog of patients, and get ourselves to a position where we're treating wounds and we're not managing them anymore. So I am going to promote our own technology briefly because it's an opportunity to do so. But I think that I'll do that, and then I'll talk about some of the other technologies and how we feel ours benefits and how our approach has been slightly different. So WoundSan is a biofilm disrupting technology. It's been developed specifically to target biofilm. It is antimicrobial, but the antimicrobial efficacy is a secondary to its biofilm disruption capability. So the data I present on this screen here, you can see there's 3 different assays that we've used. Those microbiologists in this room will most likely recognize those. They're industrially relevant. They're the 3 only recognized biofilm models that exist that notified bodies will recognize. And you can see that after 1 and 5 minutes, we're showing a significant or complete disruption of biofilm. And it's particularly when you're comparing it here with the market leader. Now, it's worth noting that this is in a liquid form. It's basically as an irrigation solution you squirt onto the wound. But as I'll show you in a second, it can be applied in foams, fibres, in various different platforms. So you can see it's strongly efficacious. It works in less than 5 minutes, which is 10 minutes quicker than the current market leader. But if you look to the bottom right, you can see that it's very low in cytotoxicity as well. The green bar there is basically how many cells were recovered following the treatment of these mammalian cells with our product. And you can see in the middle is the competitor. So you can see we're significantly less cytotoxic than products that exist on the market. And we show a very low cytotoxicity after not only the 5-minute contact time we'd expect, but even after 10, 15 minutes and up to 24 hours. So here's a list of the antimicrobials. Again, it is a bit of a shameless plug, which I apologize, but there's a number of different technologies, silver being the first column after the WoundSan, which is what dominates the market. And as I said earlier, you've got PHMB and natural products such as honey breaking through, or hexidine, which is in the same group as PHMB. And also more recently, I suppose, hypochlorous acid, which is a very good product. It's very safe, it's effective, it does show some biofilm disruption capability also. But the message here about WoundSan is that it's highly antimicrobial, it's got a high biofilm disruption, it's got a very low cytotoxicity, It's got a very high compatibility with a range of materials, which I'll touch on in a second. It doesn't induce microbial resistance because of the physical mechanisms of action and the way that it's been put together. It doesn't induce microbial resistance like some of the other products do. Now, silver is known potentially to cause, there's no solid evidence, but some of these other products have been shown to potentially induce microbial resistance. We're confident that WoundSan won't, based on the multiple active ingredients and the mechanism of action that it employs. Coming back to the compatibility, it's a technology platform. It's suitable for a range of medical device interventions, and basically anything that you want to target biofilm with, you can incorporate WoundSan into. So we're targeting wound care at the moment. We've got an irrigation solution we developed, which is currently undergoing regulatory approval. But we've got a series of other products to come, which I'll touch on a little bit more detail later. But we can put this technology into existing platforms to improve the biofilm efficacy and to help that product to disrupt biofilm and hopefully overcome the burden of biofilm it's causing, be it in a wound or be it in another environment. And the final point there is it's a patent pending formulation. So if you take a silver or a PHMB or a honey on their own, they're generally not a patentable product. They're patentable in their application. Whereas with WoundSan, because of the unique formulation we've used, we've applied for a worldwide patent on the formulation itself. So finally, I know I've been speaking for a while and I haven't really talked about nanofibres yet, but here we go. So why nanofibres? There's multiple reasons. My PhD was actually working on this exact question. I think when I started my research, I was really excited by nanofibres. I actually started researching nanofibres because I saw it on BBC News, and they were using it for tissue engineering scaffolds in UCL in London, and that was really cool. And that's one of the reasons why they're useful for wound care. So they've got a very high porosity, they've got a very high specific surface area, and they've got very strong mechanical properties if they've been manufactured in the correct way. So by using high biodegradable materials, which are highly biocompatible, they become a very good candidate for wound care. Similar structure to the ECM. I talk about tissue engineering scaffolds. The same applies here. They offer a very similar biological function, which can aid the wound healing. This is conducive to cell growth, proliferation, and adhesion. Basically, the cells within the body respond to the nanofiber structure, which helps them to heal that wound, helps them to repair, and helps them to repair in the most effective way with minimal scar tissue and effective healing for reduced likelihood of reoccurrence of that wound. There's ability to incorporate sensors, which I'll touch on very briefly in a second. The key finding of my research and the research we carried on into Hybrisan is that they're inherently bacteriostatic, which I'll talk about on the next slide. There's also the ability to load with bioactive agents. And I think this is one of the main, for me, it's one of the key selling points of electrospinning and nanofibers across all applications, is the fact that you can load these up with a lot of different things. With the right expertise, pretty much anything can be electrospun. And I know that's a bold statement, but basically you can put things in that improve properties. So in this instance, you could put growth factors in to help to heal, for example, to induce wound healing. You put in antimicrobial or anti-biofilm agents such as WoundSan to prevent and disrupt biofilm. So there's multiple things that you can incorporate for multiple reasons. But coming back to that inherently bacteriostatic, this is some of the research that we've carried out. And what we've done here is we've taken nanofibers, which you can see in the top left. We've got 300 nanometers, 500 nanometers, 1 micrometer, and 4 micrometers. And what we've done is we've put them in a favorable environment to grow a biofilm. And what we saw was that the biofilm formation is significantly greater in microfibers than nanofibers. And by doing some more research and by doing some more literature reading, we identified that this is basically because the nanofibers are smaller than the bacteria. And this is critical, I think, for any application, not only in wound care, also in tissue engineering, because within a tissue engineering scaffold, it's absolutely fundamental that the mammalian cells aren't outcompeted by bacterial cells. So the fact that these nanofibers can be inherently bacteriostatic, for me, is the most exciting part of what they can do. Adding to that a biofilm, reducing biofilm disrupting agent. So not only on the nanofibers, you're not going to get formation of biofilm, but also on the wound bed and on other areas. you've got a winning combination. So free surface electrospinning, that's a picture of me, the back of my head. Electrospinning, we've got a pilot line system. It's the 1S, not the 3S, but it still does a very good job. And I think one of the most important parts for me about free surface electrospinning is that it's capable of producing highly consistent fibers at scale with the right expertise. I think the fact that it can be incorporated into a production line for both pre and post processing and finishing of products makes it the best candidate for scale-up electrospinning. Cleaning's quick and easy. I don't need to go into too much detail. I know Katerina's already discussed this and discusses it in these talks very regularly. But for me, the benefits of free surface electrospinning over any other needle-based or even non-needle-based technologies is tremendous. So that's why we chose the Elmarco system, and we'll continue to use the Elmarco system and recommend the Elmarco system to any industrial partners that we have. So polymers and electrospun wound dressings, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there's natural and the synthetic. The two most recognized, I would say, of the synthetic are PCL and PVA, both highly electrospinnable. One's a lot cheaper than the other, so you'll quite often see blends, but they're both very biocompatible. They're also biodegradable to different extents, and by tailoring the combinations, you can really home in on biodegradability versus biocompatibility versus functionality. Of the natural polymers, you get animal-based and plant-based. I suppose cellulose is the most commonly known plant-based polymer. Also alginates, which are actually very commonly used in wound care. Sodium alginate is commonplace in wound dressings these days. And also hyaluronic acid, collagen, chitosan, gelatin. I mean, collagen is obviously one of the natural body's own polymers. So these are all things that people will recognize, and they can all be electrospun. So I'm going to touch briefly on literature. I'm not taking any credit for any of this work. I've not done any of it. These are just references that I pulled out. But it's interesting that there's a broad spectrum of smart wound dressings out there. Before I talk about these, I will talk about sensing. I think sensing is a very strong candidate for wound care for the future, but it's very important for sensing to be done in an easy to use way. So something that's easy to read, it doesn't require expensive, robust equipment. But I think when we talk about changing wound dressings, to empower that healthcare professional to not want to take that dressing off, to believe that their wound is healing underneath, I think it's important that sensors are incorporated into dressings. But there's some other, so you've got chemical, thermal, light, electric, magnetic. There's various different smart wound dressings, and we take a look at the literature if you want to read about it. But the main topic I'm highlighting here is that in the literature, the focus is on benchtop needle electrospinning. And for us to move that research from a lab state to an industrial state, we need to be thinking about scale. And I think that's the most important part of electrospinning, and it always has been. And again, that's where Elmarco can help. That's where we can help. That's what we do, scale up as well. And I think it's really important that this great research is put into application in industry by scaling up electrospinning processes. So this is my last slide, you'd be pleased to know, but how do we work? So we're developing our own range of products. We've got wound care products, anti-biofilm products, as I said. We've got a wound irrigation solution that's going to see the market very soon. We're also developing a range of nanofibres and various other materials. We work with partners. We're not a go-to-market company ourselves. We go through partners, and we look at incorporating our technology into partners' platforms. And that's purely at the moment to manage biofilm, but in the future, it's also to make smarter, more active dressings. As I said, they'll enter the market through existing and new partnerships in coming years. But I think the other topic is that we do work with academic and industry partners to develop bespoke recipes. And it's something that we pride ourselves on, I think, is our robust R&D capabilities and our facilities that we have here in the UK, that we can rapidly develop, rapidly optimize electrospinning recipes. But we've also got the characterization facilities to actually identify what we're looking for and to make sure that these products are fit for purpose. We do, of course, welcome projects. So if anyone wants to discuss anything more or wants to potentially work with us, my details are there. And of course, the floor is open for questions. But thank you very much listening.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for a very interesting talk. Yeah, please use a Q&A section for your questions.
Yeah, we already have a couple of questions, so let's start with questions. One of the question is, there are many examples of nanofibers currently being used, like being used commercially in wound care, because there are a lot of different articles. But what do you know about like commercially available products based on nanofibers?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, like you say, there's a lot of academic papers, there's a lot of research and articles showing application, and that could be ex vivo, in vivo, in vitro, various different studies. There are a couple of companies that are using nanofibers in wound care to benefit, and I think that they're generally, as I've discussed here, they're in there more for biocompatibility purposes to improve healing in that way. I think I think the anti-biofilm bit is not really a true USP, but I think it should be. But absolutely, but I think it's very limited, and there's a couple of cases which you'll see through looking at certain patents and looking at the literature, that some of the big companies have really had a go at this. They've seen that there's a need for nanofibers in wound care and also in other medical device sectors. But unfortunately, generally, the challenge that they meet is scale up. And I think that's the issue, that a lot of these are started off on the needle, and it gets to a point that it's very difficult to translate that into something that's industrially scalable. And I think that, again, the message here is that for research to be successful in industry, it's really got to be thought about how are we going to scale this from day one, which is why I think I'm not going to sort of promote Elmarco too much here. I'll leave that to you guys. But I think it's really critical. That's why we invested early in getting a pilot line machine, because we do all sorts on that machine on a day-to-day basis. We run it for quick screening just to see if we can spin certain things. We'll do everything from a little A4 sheet of paper that we can make quickly, but then allowing us to rapidly increase the rate and rapidly increase the volume of materials that we produce.
Yeah, second question. So what is your opinion? How do these healthcare, let's say, specialists are looking for this new development? Are they ready? Or is it something they are asking for every day, you know, for new outcomes? So what's on the market? Or what is your experience from that segment, like the healthcare professionals, if they are really, you know, looking forward to new stuff to work with?
Yeah, I mean, we speak to a lot of healthcare professionals. We go out and spend a lot of time in wound care conventions and conferences. And I think one of the key messages that we get is that there's a lot of education out there. Biofilm in particular is strongly talked about in wound care, but I don't really see true solutions coming forward. There is biofilm disrupting products that show some very limited efficacy. But what I hear from healthcare professionals is that they want products that you can truly believe in, that they've got full confidence in. When you ask a healthcare professional what do they use, they'll instantly say they use the market leading product. When you ask them do they have confidence in it, I mean, 9 times out of 10 they don't, but they're using it because that's the best that they've got access to. So I think if you ask a healthcare professional, they're looking for products that are quick, safe, and effective, and ultimately stuff that they can use and they know they can help to solve that patient. But ultimately, they'll measure outcome not directly on how the wound's healing, but I think more on the patient. Is the patient benefiting from the product? Is their quality of life improving? Are they spending less time with that wound? You know, that's the message then for companies like us. When you're starting your design and development, you really need to be thinking about that from the get-go. And that's how I think you create successful innovation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So there is another question, like interesting one about you talked about WoundSan, your product, how it was integrated to Electrospun product before, after one port, and what is the status of your patent application?
Okay, I mean, so in terms of the patent application that we have, it's a formulation patent. It's patent pending. It's a worldwide patent. So we've applied for multiple territories. We're still waiting for the outcome. In terms of incorporation, it's very versatile. I think obviously we've got our own in-house expertise in materials and chemistry, so we really understand what the limitations, I suppose, are of the technology, which help us to put it into existing platforms. We can put it into different carriers, be that water, be it acid, be it different solvents, which will give you an idea of how we overcome the challenges of electrospinning. And I think that's the critical piece for us with our WoundSan was when we developed that technology, we were kind of developing it for application in a material. The liquid irrigation solution application came as us, when we learned about the market, we realized there was a need. But when we developed it, we were looking at a versatile, applicable technology that can go in a range of different materials. And once it gets into those materials, it doesn't have to be encapsulated as a liquid. It can go in as a solid product, and then it shows its properties on the surface and also in the local environment to that product.
Okay. So talking about like different wound care materials, like there are hydrogels, there are gauzes with different, let's call it impregnations, etc. How are you positioning materials based on nanofibers for wound care compared to hydrogels and gauzes? What's about reapplication of these materials? How it's different?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. I think one of the things that needs to be overcome for nanofibers to succeed in wound care is that I think you really need to think about how does it integrate. So I think one of the key things that we always think about, again, I'm going to talk about product development because that's what we do. But it's like, so right, we've got a technology that we know can be applicable. What's the most adoptable method for that to be applied? So nanofibers are expensive when you've got big, thick, self-supporting structures. But actually, the requirement for nanofibers isn't a big, thick mat of nanofibers on their own. It's a functional layer to an existing product. So then when you talk about hydrogels, you talk about different products. I think that's how you succeed in this sector, is by using nanofibers for their bespoke functionality and applying that to existing materials. Add in further functionalization to improve healing, to improve biofilm disruption, and then you're really on to a winner. And I think there's merit in every single technology is out there. You know, you talk about hydrogels, you talk about gauzes, you talk about foams. I think different wounds, you need different applications, you need different dressings. So I think that there's a space for everyone. I think nanofiber can be part of a lot of them, not all of them. You don't necessarily need a nanofiber on every single dressing. I'm not saying that, but I think where there is application that a nanofiber could benefit, I think it's important that you think about the platform for which that's going to be incorporated and make sure that it forms a part of a bigger picture. So you're adding functionality to an existing recognized platform. Mm-hmm. That's how you get into a sector like wound care.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There's quite an interesting question from audience. So can you talk a little bit more about some differences in quality testing or system for production in this like medical sector versus traditional, let's say, electrospinning in general? So in medical, there are definitely some specialties in quality testing. So what is your experience in that?
Yeah, it's a good point. Obviously, in the medical device space, it's a lot more regulated. It's a lot more stringent. You've got to be following ISO 13485 here in the EU to implement your production processes and ensure that your quality is up to scratch. And I think one of the most important parts of that is product development. Again, is I think to overcome the issues of quality testing or the barrier that it could cause, you've got to make sure that your recipe is right to manufacture nanofibers of very consistent quality. Without a consistent quality nanofiber, it's going to be very difficult to prove the quality of those products, because ultimately all that you're doing with your quality assurance process when you manufacture a product is saying, right, we've manufactured with this protocol, this is what we've got, and this is how we've proven that we're getting what we think we're getting. Now, you wouldn't necessarily test every material in every instance. All that you're doing is showing that you've got robust systems in place for not only the manufacture, but for also assuring the quality. So I think it comes back to quality design, and making sure that products are developed in a very methodical way to make sure that there's a good consistency of nanofibers. Now, in terms of previously commercially produced Electrospun materials, there absolutely is. I think to lean on guidance through the regulatory process, it's a very difficult thing. Now, in the FDA in the US, you can do FDA 510K submissions, which you can lean on existing approvals, which can be used very successfully. Unfortunately, under EU MDR, that's not the case. If you wanted to follow someone else's regulatory pathway, you'd have to license the technical file off them, which quite frankly, they wouldn't do because you're going to compete with them. So I think there absolutely is previous commercially produced fibers that we could lean on. And I think this is where being an industry working together is really important, because there is people you can lean on, there's questions you can ask, and it all starts from day one. I think it comes back to that, right? We've got a product, we're going to develop it. How do we make it consistent? How do we make it high quality? How do we ensure that we don't hit those barriers? We can overcome all of the barriers to entry. And I think that's the most important thing. And also understanding the environment. You know, you need to have a good regulatory advisor, a good quality advisor. You need to make sure that you understand what the regulatory body wants to see. I mean, ultimately, all a regulatory body or a notified body is looking for is that the product's safe and effective. You can prove that in multiple different ways. And how you prove that, I think there's plenty of CROs out there. There's really good test houses that can really help you to design biocompatibility studies, to design studies. I think one of the one things I've learned over the years of experience we've had is that it's important to liaise with these guys early, because they'll have experience. If it's not electrospinning or something that's similar to you, they'll have had an issue with a product in the past where maybe the test isn't fit for purpose. They've had to adapt it just to prove that biocompatibility, to prove the safety. So yeah, it all comes down to being thorough and leaving no stone unturned.
Thank you.
Chris, you showed a perfect slide about like options you can use for electrospinning in terms of polymers, bio-based, plant-based, animal-based, and then synthetic materials, but all of them should be biodegradable, as you mentioned as well. The question will be related, what should be let's say, what is your experience with the ratio? For how long the web should survive in nanofibres state before it will be biodegraded? Do you need to use any post-treatment for your product, kind of like cross-linking or whatever else?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to answer the last bit first in terms of cross-linking. I spent a lot of time during my PhD and ever since trying to cross-link and trying to look for mechanisms to cross-link water-soluble polymers. They're costly, they're time-consuming, they're energy-consuming, and quite frankly, they cause a headache. There are mechanisms, but if you use a chemical, you've got to prove that chemical is no longer there, because generally they're very nasty. If you use heat, it's a very energy-consuming process. There's multiple other methods, but I generally try and steer away, which is why we look at combinations. If you can avoid cross-linking, avoid it at all costs is my advice. But coming back onto the question regarding biocompatibility and how long you want a product to degrade, I think it very much depends on what the purpose is of that material. Now, if you had a tissue engineering scaffold, you'd be choosing the biodegradability time of months, because you're obviously wanting it to degrade as the body forms its own natural ECM. When you're talking about a wound dressing, I mean, generally they're on for 1 to 2 days. For me, I'd like to see them on for 3 to 5 days, and I'd be looking at them degrading over that period. But there's also potentially an argument for leaving nanofibers present in a wound to allow it to heal. So then you might be talking about months. I mean, particularly when you talk about grafting, when you talk about burn wounds and things like that, I think it's very much specific to the application. But ultimately, I think the most important thing is that it degrades in the minimum amount of period. You don't want it sitting around for longer than necessary, because it causes more issues potentially with compatibility in the body. But I think more importantly, the longer it lives in the body, the more the regulatory bodies are going to be concerned about its presence. So the shortest possible period for that application would be the answer.
Thank you. And one related to this a bit, about post processes. So you mentioned that the nanofibers are bacteriostatic, And could sterilization process somehow affect this tendency? Any ideas, any experience?
It's interesting actually. I mean, there's a lot of post processes that will could actually improve the benefit. You know, they could functionalize it, they could add a charge, but then there's also the risk they'll take away a charge that could be adding benefit. They could add a coating. I mean, when you heat cross-link, quite often the fiber diameter increases because you're basically almost melting the material, and particularly if you put compression on there. So I think both negative and positive. But for me, I think it's another reason to steer clear of post-processing if you can. But again, it comes back to design and making sure that the post-process is going to be compatible with the product. I mean, if you're going to gamma sterilize something, you wouldn't put something that's going to be affected by gamma radiation in your product.
Sure. Quite a lot of question about the cost. So any idea or estimate how your product cost will compare to already existing products? Because you mentioned
you mentioned in your presentation that it's a big part of let's say complexity of the task you are solving, which is we also have to think about like any new things around our equipment. Is it acceptable? And also about the market at the end of the day, because of it, like extra costs. So I think with this question, we should end up our like presentation. We will let you answer this because we are running out of time a bit. But this, like, I don't know, maybe 5 questions around this topic. Yeah. What's all the cost?
It's very cost effective. And that's that. No, I mean, basically, I think again, I think I've used the word design in the answer of every question, and it comes back to what I said earlier: is that you want to put the thinnest layer of nanofiber absolutely possible, because making nanofibers, it's a lot more expensive than using traditional methods of non-wovens, right? If you talk about melt blowing and things like that, it's a lot cheaper. But obviously it doesn't have the functionality, it doesn't have the benefit. Where does the final product come in on cost? It's got to come in competitive. It's naturally always going to be a little bit more expensive than what's out there. But that's something that I think that we've managed from day one, that we understand the limitations of what goes where and what works and what's adoptable. So I would say that it's not a barrier. I don't think the cost is a barrier when you're using free surface technology, because when you go up to a significant scale, you can really get that cost down. And when you use significantly thinner than basically as thin as you need in terms of your layer, then generally it can be cost effective. But it comes down to application, it comes down to duration of contact on the wound, and ultimately it's a costed exercise. You've got to think of not only cost of each application, but also cost of the lifetime of that patient, which is the frustration that was airing in that comment, is that unfortunately healthcare providers don't quite recognize the full value-based system yet, but I'm sure in time they will. And the answer is that I don't think it's a barrier to entry.
Great.
So maybe the really last one question, because it's a very practical one, I have to say, that if there are like chronic wound issues, like caused by a systematic issue, like a circulation of blood or whatever else, what do you think, what is, let's say, I would say more important, what's more valuable and causes infection, like biofilm formation, infection, bacteria, or blood circulation?
I think that's an excellent question. And I think that's one of the, when I said in the presentation that generally chronic wounds aren't caused by biofilm, that was what I was getting at. And ultimately, I think all that we're trying to do is empower healthcare professionals. Okay, if you've got a biofilm in a wound, if you don't get rid of that biofilm, you're not going to heal the wound. But also what I'm saying is that if you get rid of that biofilm, you're not necessarily going to heal the wound, because as this person's pointed out, it's absolutely critical that you solve the underlying issue. And a lot of the time it is poor circulation, it could be poor diet, it could be stress. There could be a number of different factors that are causing that wound not to heal. And the healthcare professional has got to analyze that. It's got to be analyzed holistically. That approach has got to be there. But I think that the message in here is to give that healthcare professional the time to think about that holistically, and to ensure that the that they're treating the underlying problem. They need to get rid of the biofilm, because unfortunately they get so hung up trying to treat that biofilm, because they throw antibiotics at it, they throw silver dressings, they throw so many different products at it without a result, that becomes the primary issue. When it's not, it's still a secondary issue, but they identify that, and then they think, all right, we've overcome the biofilm. Why is this wound not healing? And then all of a sudden they stop the antimicrobial therapy and they could have another biofilm. So I think it's absolutely critical. And the message in here is that at Hybrisan, we do not heal wounds. We help healthcare professionals to heal wounds. And we do that by improving the treatment of biofilm to allow them to heal that wound. Because we're not experts in circulation or anything else. We're experts in biofilm. And if we can get rid of that biofilm, we know that experts in the cause of the chronic wounds can do their part. So we're just trying to be part of that jigsaw.
Yep, fantastic, cool.
I would say brilliant talk today, brilliant discussion. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so to audience, thank you for today, and I hope to see you or listen to us next time in 1 month. And stay with us.
Yeah,
thank you.
Have a good rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.
Yep, bye.